depict people differently because the notion of time periods, right? Micro example of that is generations, boomers, Gen X. Right? Nobody in the world in history has ever thought that way. No, most of the world still doesn't think that way because, of course, generations are very geographically limited to certain sociocultural political circumstances. And it turns out that science around it doesn't actually bear out much. But the idea of time periods is a thing that you don't even see until the mid 1700s. But this notion that, well, people back then dressed this way, so you need to depict them that way, and you start to get historical depictions where I'm going to draw an ancient Celt is going to look this way, right? And an ancient Rome is going to look this way. And the Bible people have to be dressed this way. That kind of that comes onto the stage only really with the sort of the discovery of the Americas,
Really?
and the Europeans, because you get people who look different than you've ever seen other people looking.
You mean
And so,
the Native
and
Americans?
yeah, so exactly, the various Native American
Like
people
indigenous peoples?
are first, yeah, I mean the early nations in the pre-European nations in the Americas.
Yeah.
Uh, Early encounters, so 14, 15, early 1600s, they're just encountered as other peoples in the same way you might encounter people from India. Well, they are at contemporaneously encountering other peoples in India, China, whatever, that you haven't had contact with in a long time. Or you might, moving from Ireland to Hungary, see people dressed very differently and speak a very different language. Well, at a certain point, there starts to become this notion of progress, and it's really, again, it's with the
Hmm.
Enlightenment, right? With the Enlightenment, that, well, they're further behind than we are. Like the tools that you use becomes a definer of um uh historical, somehow becomes a measurement of historical marker. And from that, then kind of comes the idea of progress. So I used to use these kind of tools. Now I use these kind of tools. Therefore, other people who are using these tools are clearly more behind than
Yeah,
me.
primitive.
Because for
Primitivism.
me, one preceded another,
Yep.
right? Or one succeeded another. And I think I'm better with this set. So therefore, other people with set A must be more primitive than me,
Yep.
right? And then you extrapolate that out. And then it's all of a sudden, well, they dress this way, and there was, and the first documented, from what I remember, this historian is just kind of remarking it offhand, that I think the first, or one of the earliest documented examples of this, was actually arguing for American Indian, like, dignity, like treating them like human beings, basically.
Shocking.
Because all of a sudden that became a thing, that became an issue that wasn't an
Yeah.
issue prior to that. They were obviously just foreign nations, but at a certain point, somehow, with the advent and arrival of certain religious groups with certain ideas about their inherent moral superiority that was predestined, as taught by our great magistrate Calvin, whoever they might be, right, whatever their affiliations might be. They arrive and have certain preconceived notions about this, but their superiority over other Europeans, and naturally then all the more superiority over people who are that much more different. But there was these arguments, I don't know, maybe it was from Quakers or somebody, that was like, no, 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 no. You see, you have to be understanding with these people. They're just primitive. We were this way, like your own ancestors were this way just a few hundred years ago. And it shows the picture of I don't know, a Mohican or something, some Iroquois person or somebody like that in a loincloth, right? Painted up. And then it shows a Scottish person painted in blue,
Yeah.
what we now think of, this kind of this Pictish,
The Celts. Yeah.
idealized, romanticized Pictish warrior. And so you see your own people were like this. We too, but for the grace of God go we, essentially we too were like that. And if we Christianize them and civilize, like they can be civilized. Like you shouldn't just massacre them. They can be civilized like us. Because not so long ago, we were primitive Stone Age, savages as well. Essentially, that was the argument, which was a totally new kind of argument,
Hmm.
not because it was arguing for their dignity, but because it was locating it on a timeline of primitivism versus progressed technological advanced peoples.
Yeah, that's an interesting point because I know friends up there in Minneapolis who are part of the nations, the peoples up there. They said that the history did not sit well because there were these forced conversions and forcing them to drop their tribal ways and forcing them to wear collars, and attend Western schools, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Because I think what you're saying is it was a new notion and it quickly morphed into we need to force them to become part of the modern world. And that we can perfect them, we can fix them by introducing them to this stuff and to force them to, you know, join the Calvinist culture or whatever it was, or the Catholic culture even up there, the Brebeufs and the like. So that the idea of fixing the human person, making the human person malleable to our will, conforming to our will, seems to have been early on, but
Well,
it's yeah. Go ahead.
I think a refinement of that though, because it's the forcing is obvious and natural if you're convinced that you're more advanced. Right. In the same way that, look, you need this smallpox vaccine or you're all gonna die of smallpox or malaria, whatever. I've got to force this on you because it's for your own good. So if you're convinced that the way that I am is simply more advanced, then yes, it is superior, not inherently, not because my genetics are better than your genetics, but because I've discovered new things and I have to share these good things with you, whether you like it or not, for your own good. And I think what was very new, what was a very novel idea, was that our differences, instead of being located merely geographically, people over there talk like this and dress this way, which is the way that this is what you've got documented throughout the Middle Ages and into the 13th, 14th, 15th century. People travel. They traveled a lot. They travel and they say, over here, they talk like this and they do these strange things and they have this kind of clothing. But there's no notion that somehow, one or the other is more advanced.
Mm.
There's this new notion all of a sudden in the late 1600s, early 1700s that the difference is not merely geographical, but it's because of somehow chronological.
Yeah. Yeah, which is not to say that we should all go back to the Aztec Empire and start excoriating our enemies or anything like that, or that the early Picts who did paint their bodies blue and put dung in their hair were better off, or that whatever. It's not to
Because
say
again, the whole idea is this timeline consciousness, which is totally fabricated, totally arises out of.
Right.
I mean, it has various causes, but it comes
Right.
on the scene pretty suddenly, and now we just take that for granted as obviously true.
Well, yeah, and along those lines, I mean, yeah, along those lines, I think it is intriguing how new a notion that is, and how interesting a backlash there has been in Western culture to certain things. So, like for instance, when the Scots get defeated at Culloden, afterwards it became very popular to wear the kilt all over British courts because the young bucks who were against the king wanted to show off that they were solidarity man with Prince Charlie and the like, and so they were wearing the kilt, but the Scots didn't wear the kilt. They wore they sometimes wore the kilt and they sometimes more often wore just a blanket to keep themselves warm because it's bloody freezing up there. But the kilt was not the thing until after Culloden. So they're revivifying a primitivist culture in order to show that we're one with the man. Same thing occurs too when they start reviving the classics, and the classics are all pure and pristine and white, and all the statues are white, and everybody was noble back then. And for a long period of time, there was this sort of return to that simple, primitive notion of Rome that was so dignified and lovely. And only
White
recently
statues and everything.
yeah, and only recently has it been discovered that that's a complete malarkey, poppycock.
They're all painted.
So yeah, they're all painted,
I mean, that's
and
exactly right. And the
sewers and
romanticism,
violence and everything.
exactly, and similarly the romanticist movement, that all these Gothic cathedrals were dark inside.
Yeah,
it's this dark, and then the light would shine through the stained glass windows. Like, actually, they were bright white alabaster on the outside,
tremendously
interior
bright,
bright white with polychrome painting. A lot of like Notre Dame, unfortunately, like they just finished restoring the paint, the thing caught on fire. There's a lot of polychrome, like lots of bright colors painted on the walls. But because of centuries of soot, really mostly accelerated because of the Industrial Revolution and coal burning, So from the 1600s onward, coal
Yeah.
burning, even in homes, God forbid, also even in churches, for warmth creates an oily soot, unlike wood burning, which doesn't stick to stuff. Coal burning, the smoke sticks to stuff, and now all of a sudden you got a black coating on everything. When in reality, it was either alabaster or white, or polychrome, was painted bright colors. That these things weren't dark inside, right? They were bright color. Well, like you said, the statues in classical antiquity were, of course, brightly colored painted. It's just the paint has worn off over time.
I even remember seeing a picture of my great aunt Kate, who died sometime in the 70s, dressed up as a young girl in the what would that have been, 30s, maybe 40s, but dressed up in Oriental garb, Muslim garb. Because
Orientalism.
Orientalism at the beginning of the century. You go back to that nice primitive form of living, unburdened by Western culture, where you see all that primitive stuff, the way the Muslims lived, and then the reality is it's really not that fun, because they actually are humans and they actually have a lot of problems. So, but the Orientalism was another sort of like revivifying of an older classical sort of form of primitive living. And I guess the point that I find intriguing is that we seem to always want to have these ever receding Ausonian shores. We always want to have this primitive world, which was perfect and wonderful and noble and virtuous. And that's the way it should be, and never interpret it in terms of our own time period, and never interpret in terms of our own cultural idiom. The thing that's startling to me is that when you look at Shakespearean drama, all of his plays were set with people wearing Elizabethan garb.
Yeah.
They almost never wore traditional Roman garb for the Roman plays, or traditional Celtic garb for the King Lear, and and the like. And
all the things in Italy, the characters are speaking English.
Mm-hmm.
I was going to point that out. And New English too.
Yep.
He was speaking what was like Shakespearean English was the new hip in vogue sort of slang of the way the kids in London are talking these days.
Yeah.
Because English has undergone massive transformation, rapid dialect shifts and digressions and evolutions during Shakespeare's lifetime, during his early life. Like how he's writing is not the way his parents spoke.
Yeah.
It's just big shifts, geographical and time-wise and otherwise. But then Britain was being propelled forward it was rapidly being born as a world empire at that point.
Mm-hmm. But I think that the argument, from what I gather, is not just a desire to maintain the primitive, noble, virtuous form of Homer's English translated Odyssey, because who reads Homeric Greek after all, for crying out loud? Yeah. But the translations we've had from Dryden and Pope all the way to Fitzgerald and Fagles have been these noble, virtuous, powerful translations. Now, I don't like the Emily Wilson translations. I'm not advocating for that. But the idea that we have to somehow preserve the nobility of this thing is kind of a strange notion. It's very akin to Orientalism or the medievalism or the primitivism or whatever it is, where we are one with the indigenous Americans because we wear a headdress. It seems to me it's a very kind of off notion, but I think the argument is a little more than that, because I think that the people that are arguing for disliking Nolan's work are saying that prior translations up to Emily Wilson did honor to the original text, and they got the heart of it, and they tried very faithfully to be adherent to what Homer was desiring to convey. And I think that's valid, because I think Fagles, Fitzgerald, all these guys, they were trying very hard to have a translation that wasn't too much of a traitor, as we all the famous aphorism. But that's where it gets into a dicey area, because now we're talking not a translation that's word for word. We're talking a interpretation, because just as a translator is always a traitor, somebody who is putting into a new medium this original poem is not just going to be a traitor. They're going to be an interpreter. There's no way around it. Right. I mean, you have to be. You have to be.
I mean, Romeo and Juliet. Just to pick an example. Right. That's the Pyramus and Thisbe, right? I mean, it's a very, very, very old story.
Yeah.
But he's translating it into a new medium, and he's playing really fast and loose with the plot. Basic idea. Boy and girl fall in love, they're forbidden, and then they kill each other. They kill themselves, right?
Kill themselves, yeah.
Other than that, it's all invented, right? It's all invented. And it's projected onto two different actual feuding families in Italy.
Yes, right.
So
scandal.
like there's layers of mixing and matching that maybe isn't actually that dissimilar to what Nolan's just done with the Odyssey.
I don't think it is.
Frankly, right? Like it's the same. I'm going to pull in a character from over here. We're going to situate some totally ahistorical stuff here and make it also really kind of fit the values of the court at the Elizabethan court at the time.
That's a really interesting example. Pyramus and Thisbe, they're both Greek families, and they're not warring with each other necessarily. It's just that the boy and the girl are not supposed to marry.
Yeah.
When Shakespeare puts it into Verona, I think it's Verona, and he has the two warring families against each other, the Capulets and the Montagues. He's not at all talking about the houses of York and Lancaster. There's no way he's talking about that, right?
No.
He couldn't ever be talking about, the old generation and the new generation in England. That's not what he's talking about at all. He's not making a commentary on the violence of his own age. This is Italy, obviously.
Yeah,
right.
That's why they all speak Italian. Funny part, even that, because it wasn't Italy. It was, I mean, you know what I mean? Like, Italy's also a modern fabrication.
Yeah.
So we're even doing it right now. We're
reinterpreting. Let's go Italy. But that's an interesting thing to me, because if you're wanting to have a word for word interpretation where you just take the text and you literally put it on the screen and have people mouth the words like a sock puppets or something. Yeah, you might be faithful to Homer, but then again, you might not. Homer might be hating that sort of thing, saying, God, this is boring. Why did you destroy my text by not trying to do anything with it? I gave you 2 coppers and you threw them in the ground. What the hell's wrong with you?
And one of the translation interpretation thing is that even there, what's like Fagles, the other fine people that you mentioned, company. Even what they're doing, they're trying to do honor to the book. They're not trying to deconstruct it. Okay, so that is a different thing that Miss Emily is she's engaged in a different project. Whether it's good or bad, it's a different project than an attempt to translate something. Because she's not doing translation, she's doing something else. Any professional translator will tell you that. Just look it up.
Yeah.
And that's okay. That's fine. Like we just said with Shakespeare and Pyramus and Thisbe, he's not trying to translate this old story. He's telling a different one.
Yeah.
But these other guys who are translating, even what they're doing is inherently an act of interpretation, because they're choosing these words and not those words, phrasing it in a way that sounds elevated, not in the way that ordinary Englishmen speak ordinarily. And so that is a choice. And they do this with the Bible too, famously.
Yeah.
The
careful here. Careful.
King James translation is the only. Oh, give me
the only one.
The only one. Huey Rames, if you're a papist, which is actually a horrible. Like accuracy wise, the Huey Rames has got massive issues.
Yeah. Right.
Sorry,
exactly.
If you can read Latin, God forbid if you can read Greek. Ouch. But and I'm not just talking about word choice. So the Gospels are a lot more crass.
Yeah.
When you read them in the original Greek, they're just more crass and visceral. Like there's body function imagery that's glossed over in English translations, because of the sensitivities of the time and what was seen as elevated speech and things you don't talk about, things you do talk about, the way that peasants talk versus the way that pious people and educated aristocracy talk and all of that. In the court of King James. And so what we've come to know as the Bible is actually very Bowdlerized, if in a certain way compared to what's actually in the text. So sorry, but that's to say the guys who translated Homer in the Victorian period, late 18, early 1900s, and all of that, they're trying to do their best to interpret it to meet the linguistic usage of their times, and they're making certain stylistic choices, which is a kind of interpretation. But they're also, in doing such, they're inserting their Victorian 19th, 20th century values into the work.
Yeah,
that may not be there, which is obvious and evident because most people most especially, and this is I think probably pertinent to the race and casting question, is that most people assume that Homer and his characters were white.
Yeah,
And by
yeah, or
white,
some
they
shade
mean
thereof. Yes.
19th century English or Prussian person.
Yeah.
I hate to break it to you, but those people have way more to do with the Palestinians you think should be wiped off of the coast than they do with anybody in Germany or Ireland or Britain. Right. Even
Surprising. Yeah.
today, I mean, God forbid, like, look at a freaking map. Where does this take place? Over there, you could walk from one place to another. Evidently, it takes you 10 years to get from this place to that place, but that's because the Chat GPT or GPS is redirecting you around.
Yeah.
But that's like there's actually no reason in and of itself, for example, that the works of Homer have anything to do with Western culture, Western civilization. They just do not actually form part of the Western canon in and of themselves. That is a conscientious choice on the part of self-consciously Westerners going and choosing a work from this place and not from some other place.
Right.
And saying that is part of our heritage too.
Why did not the
nobody in Greece would not have been obvious to anybody in Greece.
Right. But that's a good point right there, because why didn't things like the Gilgamesh become the national epic of America, or why didn't the Tain Bakul become the national epic of America? Or
that's a great example. Something ostensibly West.
Yeah.
The Tain is not part of the canon, and
most
somehow
people never heard of it.
This thing from Greece, that's canon. So the Irish people are reading. Joyce writes a book called Ulysses.
Ulysses, right?
Not Cahulan.
Not Cahulan. Can you imagine?
Right?
Cahulan by.
And it wouldn't have made sense because obviously by that point, like, we've identified this is part of our heritage and not necessarily that. Because if he had written in Cahulan, he would have sounded like a nationalist romanticist, like a romantic nationalist. Because that's where that got classified, right? Was a Celtic nationalism became kind of this woo-woo, this is who we are thing. And anyway, he would have felt different. It would have been different. But the Byzantines, like, even so, when Columbus is sailing the ocean blue, Constantinople has just recently fallen. In living memory, there was an emperor of Rome in Constantinople. All these Greek-speaking peoples who called themselves Romans, who the Arabs today still call Roman, because literally the word in Arabic for a Greek person is a Roman, right? Remember this. They're looking over at Frankistan, right, which is a helpful category, like the West, that is to say, Germany, German people, French people, North Italians, English people, that's all Frankistan. And that's how they talk about it.
Yeah.
It's these backwards people, even in the 15th century, that somehow, literally, their own guy, a Greek guy, is part of that heritage, would be utterly preposterous to them. Right? If you were to tell them that, Frankistan, and actually this offshoot province of Frankistan, called Britannia, is going to become the leading world power, they would have locked you away.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And in the survival of the epic, the Odyssey is very deeply entwined with the movements of history, because, like you said, the people that conquered or dominated ended up carrying with them this text, so to speak, as part of their cultural idiom.
Yeah.
Had it been another group of people, had it been, for instance, the Franks, who dominated Europe and were untinged by Roman culture, not that that would have happened, but had it happened, we would have had a very different epic as our national epic. It would have been much more Norse, it would have been the Norse gods. Had the Irish conquered all of Europe.
All right, lad.
Makes me chuckle. But had the Irish conquered all of Europe, they probably wouldn't have. They would have had a very different epic. They would have had something else instead. The Dagda, the story of the Dagda, for instance.
Right.
So
and in fact, there were movements to try and let's cast off this classical thing, cast off this Greco-Roman thing, and embrace Nordic Germanic heritage and all of that.
Yeah,
there's
still going on
today to try and do that.
Yep.
Right. But they're famously in the early 1900s. That was really popular. It culminated in what they, conceived of for themselves was the restoration of a German empire that could last 1,000 years, and it didn't go so well in the end of it. But
Yeah,
it was a try. You know, they thought, hey, this could be a fun experiment.
Yeah, but you know, even they, interestingly enough, they looked for confirmation of their right to rule in the Indus Valley.
Bingo.
You know, they wanted to show we're Aryan, we're attached to these people that conquered the Indus Valley way back when, and that's why we have this hooked cross thing. You know, yeah. And why didn't they adopt the Bhagavad Gita, you know, or the Mahabharata as their epic? Why not?
It's too esoteric, man.
Yeah, I mean, that'd be really interesting to have not goose-stepping Germans walking around, but people doing those high kicks that the Indians do. You know, yeah, exactly. Yeah, dancing like a ballet girl or something. You know, that'd be kind of wild. It'd also be a little scary. But I guess the whole strain of this is that although the Odyssey is fantastic, and although the Odyssey is a pillar of what we call Western civilization, and although it's very important to maintain the real sense of the epic, it doesn't mean that there aren't other epics, and it doesn't mean that this is some holy relic, and it also doesn't mean that it can't be not translated, adapted to say something powerful about the society in which we live. And that leads me to the point about the movie, is that I think that's exactly what Nolan is doing. I think that when I see it, and I've seen it twice now, I'll see it 3 times before Friday, I think what he's doing is he's actually taking this fantastic epic and using it as a launching point to tell a powerful story about our current situation. So that the casting and the language, the bad armor, the leaving out or keeping in of certain passages, it's all done in order to tell this commentary. It's the problem of modern civilization. Say, well, I agree or disagree with his thesis, but I think it really is, I hate to say unscholarly. It's unscholarly. It's really kind of just wrong to jump into the thing with preconceived notions and then say I've refused to accept what he's saying. That would be no different than, say, jumping into Julius Caesar by Shakespeare, saying I love Caesar and therefore I hate this play, you know, because it's garbage. Because Mark Antony is the best. He's heroic. He's just so cool and virtuous and noble. And look how Shakespeare depicts him. Golly, undermining Western culture he is.
Yeah, right. He's glorifying exactly.
And I find it funny because Shakespeare was undermining Western culture, so to speak. If Western culture was wrapped up with Henry and Elizabeth, you know, and all that, I think he really was a very subversive playwright when it comes down to it. We hold him now as being a traditional playwright and somebody that we look to for value systems. But at the time, that wasn't the case. He was a terribly subversive writer. And he even wrote an unfinished play about Thomas More, who had been ripped into pieces, and the pieces have been stuck at the different gates of London, you know. So what kind of guy is that? Yeah.
Thomas, all y'all go look that up. Read those bits from Thomas More.
Yeah. So, you know, if one is a fan of royalty, like all these crazy royalists,
and I am,
you want to emulate Henry VIII or whatever. I'm just poking you, but you know, if you're pro the establishment, so to speak, and you're like, this is the way that things should be, then you read Shakespeare like, this guy is really undermining stuff and pointing out a problem that maybe we should address. And to be honest, the same thing was done way back when with Euripides. Euripides did the same thing to the kings of Athens. Right. That basically we are maybe not the best thing on the face of the planet. Maybe we shouldn't have destroyed that entire village of Melos. You know, maybe we shouldn't have sent all those people off there to that island, whatever. Was it Corsica? I forget what the island was. Suddenly, it wasn't. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Sardinia, the Sardinian expedition. That's what he was so critical of.
Okay.
But same thing seems to be happening in the Nolan movie. He seems to be pointing out an issue that he sees as being one of the most important right now. And he goes back again and again to what was Xenia in Greek, which is the law of Zeus. It was a law of respecting other people and taking care of the stranger and watching out for your neighbor. You know? So he keeps going back to that, and he says it was shattered, it was broken. And primarily it was broken by Odysseus and his choice to use a gift as a weapon in the Trojan horse.
Yes.
And
then he has to pay for it by, oh, that's interesting. Yeah.
He has to pay for it by the wanderings and the suffering and losing all his men. And there's even a point there where Calypso says, you have to stop trying to take control of everything and give yourself over to the gods and basically die. And so he goes out on the water on his little raft, and he just floats until the storm breaks up his raft, and he drowns. He falls into the water and drowns. And for all its intents and purposes, he dies at that point. And right after that, he's washed up on the shores of Ithaca, which, if you're a Christian, that represents something called baptism. And it's a really powerful moment because you realize he has made reparations so that he is able then to take care of his own house, which follows right afterwards.
That's interesting because, so I haven't seen the movie, as you mentioned, and I'm probably not going to see it in the foreseeable future. Not for ideological reasons, very pragmatic. I don't see movies. It's just that.
Right.
But what you just described sounds exactly like a medieval morality play. Like that would be a story right out of the 12th, 11th century.
Good point.
Telling it just like that. If you were to say, oh, and by the way, actually Nolan was working from, such and such, sort of, plot cues from something found in the Book of Exeter or whatever, right? Some in the Bodleian Library, they uncovered another thing, and it was a retelling of the Odyssey from 13th century Bristol, and it went like this. That I'd be like, yep, that sounds totally plausible. Right. And what you just described is exactly how a Christian in the High Middle Ages would have written the Odyssey, or would have rewritten the Odyssey, and likely enough did, just through sheer chance. Right.
Well, it's really interesting. It's really interesting along those lines because those morality plays, they were made for the peasantry, and they were primarily simplistic. I don't say simplistic; they were simple plays.
A lot of the morality plays done at fairs were simplistic, yes, and the written works that conveyed the same thing were maybe more complex, but yeah.
So, for instance, names of those characters were frequently death, despair, ennui, they had names that were what they were. They became eventually. Piers Plowman is the famous example of this. They became that poem of Piers Plowman where he goes through and he fights through the slough of despond. He meets characters along the way that represent the sins, and their name is pride, wrath. Oh, well, what do you do for a living, Mr. Wrath? And so there wasn't any nuance in that sense, but names, as you and I have talked about on this podcast frequently, names have consequences, especially in literature. And because we are so far removed from the names, we don't often recognize when the names are being used consciously in a more complex work. Homer does this, certainly. But he makes characters where the name is Greek, and the Greeks would have known the definition, but we don't know the definition. So, for instance, Calypso, who holds Odysseus for those however many years, enshrouds him, entombs or enwombs him, and the name itself means darkness, eclipse. That's where that's what it is.
Yeah.
He is being eclipsed by this moon-like character, this goddess. Circe, that means circle. It means an enclosed circle, right?
Round and round.
Yeah, exactly. Telemachus means warlike, a warrior, young warrior. Odysseus means to give or to receive pain. Penelope means little duck. So all these little names that are in the Odyssey, they mean something. And then the character embodies the thing almost like a morality play. And famously, Nolan does exactly the same thing. We don't recognize it, but the names that he uses, which are the Homeric names, are actually embodied in something about the character. And this is where it gets, Nolan can be meta sometimes, where his meaning extends beyond the movie. He goes and casts Elliot Page in this role scene. It's almost like he's an artist. He goes and he casts Elliot Page Sinon, which has caused the most friction among a lot of conservatives, because they don't want anything to do with trans people, and they don't want trans people to even appear in public, put them in a room somewhere and lock the door and throw away the key. But what they won't recognize is that trans people do not do what they do out of happiness. They do what they do out of misery and sorrow and despair and loneliness and mania, a certain type of mania. And once they do what they do, mutilating their own bodies, they cannot walk back from it. And then they can't get work, and then they lose friends and family, and then they're ridiculed, and they can't play a woman on the screen, they can't play a man on the screen. I mean, they're basically just effed. So talk about, and the whole lie that's fed to them is a lie from the progressive movement, which is that the body is a machine that can be manipulated. It's a mutable object, like the island of Dr. Moreau. And once they do this, they become essentially the pariah of society, the scapegoat of society, the tragedos of society. They sing their little goat song, right? Mm-hmm. I really shouldn't have done that. And sometimes, like Chloe Cole, they can walk it back and somehow regain something of their original lives. Something, not much. But sometimes, like Elliot Page, they do the opposite, and they just double down and they try to be defensive about it. And hopefully, praise God, she will eventually have a conversion moment where she's able to recover who she was originally. I don't know if that will happen. It's in the hands of God. But my point being, right now, who better to represent a fallout victim from the culture war perpetrated on us by the progressive movement than a character that has been physically scarred, even by her own volition, physically scarred. And she becomes the thing that draws people in. They're like, I'm going to see this movie because it has Ellen Page and I'm pro-trans rights. And they come and they see the movie, and it's totally opposite from what their worldview is, because the movie is totally opposite from that worldview. And what better to draw people in, who say, I hate trans rights, and they go see the movie just because to spite them, and they get drawn in, and maybe they might see something that changes their worldview. In other words, she becomes a Trojan horse. She is the Trojan horse.
See what he did there? That's pretty cool.
Yeah. And the opening scene, the Sinon character rushes in front of the Trojan horse in order to try to tell the Trojans that this is a gift, and they kill her. They kill her immediately, and they kill her by pinning her to the horse with a spear, so that she and the horse become one. Yeah.
Oh, dude.
Talk about meta.
Yeah. He is meta.
Yeah.
Well done, Chris.
Yeah, and I mean,
if you're watching out there, we'll feature you on the show. Friend of the show, Chris Nolan.
Yeah, right. Thumbs up, buddy. No, I'm really quite amazed by it, and I'm amazed that more people did not cotton to that sort of thing. It's the one disagreement I have with Nolan, because there have been some good reviews on the right. Jonathan Pajot, for instance, and Spencer Clavin, and even Ben Shapiro have all said it was a really good movie. Whatever you think of it, but it's surprising. But most people on the right have been condemning the movie wholeheartedly, and I don't know. I find it really intriguing times. My brother was called a liberal jerk they used other words, because he expressed positive affirmation of the movie. So quite surprising, really.
Which there's a lot more violence and lack of identity. So this is what I think is most interesting, and maybe this is closing thoughts or something, but the reaction to the movie speak to me. And remember, I don't live where a lot of the people who are reacting to the movie live.
Right.
I live in a different world, geographically and metaphysically. But geographically, which is more palatable for many people to understand why there's a difference. But there seems to be a lot of violence normalized. Like,
yes,
what we over here might perceive as extremely, out of line reactions, which are understood by the natives locally over there in Gringostan, as being Yankee Stan. Can I say Yankee Stan? Yankee Stan, that'll be at least palatable to, half of the place there. Over in Yankee Stan, it seems like, well, that's pretty middle of the road, like your baseline.
Yeah.
it seems to me the baseline has shifted so much towards a certain pyrotechnic level of reactivity and criticism that is unnoticed, like a frog boiling in water. And the fact that the locus, as I see it, maybe because I'm a psychologist, so focused on the central theme is identity, the identity of the actor, the identity of the character, the identity of the work, our identity as Westerners, your identity as Americans, whatever it might be, coupled with this sort of violentism. The origin of that word is here. We just coined it right now. Violentism, with that identity focus, to me, speaks to exactly why this work is so important.
Oh, yes.
And so needed, because it's speaking precisely to that point, right? I mean, it's a work, even Homer's original is very much about identity, like Odysseus, right? I mean, he's undergoing an esoteric moral transformation, psychic transformation of identity. And that's ostensibly what the work is about, even at its most basic form.
Yep.
And that's exactly what the West generally, and America explicitly, like self-consciously, is struggling with today.
I think he nailed it. I think he nailed it. I think that Odysseus' whole point, the whole point of the movie is that Odysseus has to wash the stink of Agamemnon off him so that his wife doesn't stab him in the throat when he gets home.
Yeah.
Made pretty darn clear in the movie. And so you got to ask yourself, what is the stink of Agamemnon? And this is what kind of scares me a bit about our situation here on this side of the bathtub. I think both people that consider themselves on the left and on the right are being played like a bongo drum on a regular basis.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And people on the right don't think they are because they stand up to the man. Many of them recognize things that are worthwhile, et cetera, et cetera. Well, that's cool. But this is a classic example of their preconceived biases that have been inculcated in them by the weight counterweight problem showing up. Anyone who opposes something might be very right in their opposition, but in opposing, they might become so calcified in their opposition that they can't react naturally when something comes along that sets them off. Oh, you think that, you must be a commie. Oh, you think that, you must be one of these trans defenders, Oh, you think that, you're nothing but a wimpy guy, go do some reps, that kind of thing. And you may be right that exercise is good, and that homosexuality and transmogrification are bad, and maybe you're right, but maybe in being right for so long, you've lost the ability to see where you're wrong. And this is really intriguing. I just thought of this because Odysseus was famous for drawing out the enemy by appearing to be weak. I wonder, is the movie Odysseus because it's drawing out the enemy, right, by appearing to be PC, DEI.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. I hadn't thought that before.
That's super cool.
Well, for having not seen the movie, you held your own for pretty good for an hour and a half there. And all this does get back to Tolkien, because we're going to be talking about the fall of Doriath and the fall of Gondolin, which are about the collapse of civilization, which is one of the big themes in the movie, and big worries about, culture these days.
Yeah.
So there it is.
And it precipitates another fella going off on a wild goose chase sailing adventure into the West to find himself and his people.
Maybe minus a